When we think of the Vietnam War, our minds immediately conjure images of helicopters cutting through the tropical sky, the deafening sound of gunfire echoing through flooded rice fields, and young soldiers navigating through an impenetrable jungle. But there is a story within that story, a chapter rarely told in conventional history books, a narrative that has remained in the shadows for decades, whispered only among veterans who shared beers in dusty bars or gathered in silent celebrations. This is the story of the enemy that no one expected to face, the opponent who did not carry weapons, did not follow orders from Hanoi, and did not distinguish between Americans and Vietnamese. This is the account of how nature itself became a constant challenge, of how creatures that inhabited those lands millions of years ago turned into significant threats that required constant respect and caution. If you are enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave in the comments the time you are watching this documentary. Their interaction helps us continue to bring fascinating stories like this. The journey begins at 965, when the first significant contingents of American troops landed on the beaches. These young soldiers, many of whom had never left their hometowns before enlistment, found themselves suddenly immersed in an environment that challenged everything they knew. Basic training in the United States had prepared these men for urban combat, for open-field strategies, to confront a human enemy with predictable tactics. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared them for what awaited them in the green and humid depths of the Vietnamese jungle. Southeast Asian rainforests represent one of the most complex and biodiverse ecosystems on the planeta living maze, where each shadow can hide both a falling leaf and a waiting predator. The moisture was suffocating, reaching levels that made sweat run continuously, soaking uniforms in minutes, creating the perfect environment for skin infections and equipment deterioration. The temperature rarely dropped below 30 degrees Celsius, even at night, turning each movement into a Herculean effort. The first reports began to emerge within weeks of the initial deployment of troops. Soldiers returning from jungle patrols arrived at base camps with stories their superiors initially dismissed as exaggerations born of combat stress or extreme heat-induced hallucinations. They talked about snakes the size of tree trunks, spiders large as dinner plates, insects that seemed to have come out of feverish nightmares. Medical officials began to notice a disturbing pattern in casualty reports. While direct combat injuries certainly filled the hospital tents, an increasing number of soldiers were being evacuated for completely different reasons. Stings, bites, mysterious infections that spread quickly through the skin, and severe allergic reactions to unknown poisons. The military command began to realize that they were fighting a war on two fronts, and one of them was against an enemy that could not be negotiated, intimidated, or defeated with weapon superiority. The serpents of Vietnam became legendary among the troops, and with good reason. The region is home to more than 140 different species of snakes, and at least 30 of them have venom potentially lethal to humans. The many-banded kite, a relatively small but incredibly poisonous snake, had the disturbing habit of seeking warmth at night. Soldiers often woke up to discover these creatures coiled inside their sleeping bags, attracted by body heat. The venom of kite is neurotoxic, attacking the nervous system silently and insidiously. Bite victims often did not feel significant pain at the bite site, leading them to underestimate the severity of the situation until it was too late. The symptoms began subtly, perhaps with slight numbness or difficulty focusing vision, but they quickly progressed to muscle paralysis and difficulty breathing. Without proper treatment, the results could be fatal. Russell's viper presented a different but equally terrifying challenge. Larger and more aggressive than kite, this serpent did not flee from human presence like many other species. When threatened or surprised, she attacked with astonishing speed, injecting a hemotoxic poison that destroyed tissues and caused serious complications. Soldiers bitten by Russell vipers faced severe symptoms. The site of the bite swelled significantly, and the poison affected the blood clotting system in a dangerous way. Without prompt treatment, the consequences could be severe, and even with medical intervention, some survivors faced long-term complications, including damage to tissues and internal organs. But perhaps no snake would inspire as much terror as the real snake, or king snake as it was known to American soldiers. The largest venomous reptile in the world, capable of reaching lengths greater than 5 meters, The actual snake possessed not only intimidating size but also astonishing intelligence for a reptile. These creatures were known to actively pursue perceived threats, lifting a third of their body from the ground and moving rapidly toward the target. The characteristic hiss of the royal snake, a deep, resonant sound that more resembled a canine growl than the typical snake hiss, froze the blood of even the most experienced soldiers. Its venom, though less toxic drop by drop than that of some other species, was injected in considerable quantities enough to pose extreme danger even to large animals. For a human, a bite without immediate treatment was often fatal. Military commanders quickly realized that they needed to educate their troops about these dangers. Improvised training sessions were conducted whenever possible, with doctors and, where available, wildlife experts brought in to show photographs and describe the specific dangers of each species. Soldiers have learned to check their boots before putting them on each morning, to shake their gear before using them, to never put their hands in crevices or holes without first inspecting them carefully. They learned that many snakes were more active during twilight and night, making night patrols even more dangerous than they already were. They learned to recognize the signs of a snake bite, even when the bite itself was barely felt, and the critical importance of immobilizing the affected limb and seeking medical help immediately. But the snakes were only the beginning of the challenges that the Vietnamese jungle presented. Insects, in their dizzying diversity and astronomical numbers, proved to be a constant and inescapable torment. Mosquitoes were ubiquitous, their clouds forming veils visible in the humid afternoon air. These were not the annoying but relatively harmless mosquitoes that soldiers knew from their homes. These were vectors of diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. Malaria was the most common scourge, with multiple strains present in the region, some of them resistant to preventive drugs that troops took religiously. The symptoms began with high fever and violent chills, the affected soldiers shaking uncontrollably even under the scorching tropical sunund in severe cases, convulsions and coma. Cerebral malaria, the most dangerous form of the disease, was potentially fatal if left untreated, and even with treatment, some soldiers succumbed. Those who survived a bout of malaria often relapsed months or even years later, the parasite hiding in their livers, waiting for the right time to emerge again. Dengue, transmitted by different species of mosquitoes that reproduced in the numerous bodies of stagnant water created by the monsoons, bore its own mark of misery. Known as a bone-breaking fever by the Vietnamese, the name perfectly described the sensation. Infected soldiers described joint pain so severe that they felt as if their bones were being broken from the inside out. The fever rose considerably, often exceeding 40 degrees Celsius. A characteristic rash spread throughout the body, and in severe cases, bleeding complications could occur, a condition that required urgent medical attention. Japanese encephalitis, although less common, was particularly feared because it directly attacked the brain, causing inflammation that could result in permanent neurological damage or serious consequences. Soldiers who contracted encephalitis developed neck stiffness, mental confusion, seizures, and often fell into a coma. Even those who recovered often had permanent sequelae, including memory problems, personality changes, and partial paralysis. Efforts to control mosquito populations were constant but largely futile. The American Army sprayed heavy insecticides around base camps, creating chemical perimeters that offered some temporary protection. But in the jungle, where patrols spent days or weeks away from the relative safety of the bases, there was no escape. Soldiers slept under permethrin-treated nets, wore repellents that made their skin oily and irritated, and yet woke up covered in stings, their skins turned into landscapes of unbearably itchy red bumps. Scratching the stings, while providing momentary relief, often led to secondary infections in the humid, dirty jungle environment, creating purulent wounds that refused to heal. The leeches represented another psychological and physical torment. The Vietnamese jungle was home to several species of these blood-sucking annelids, and they were abundant in any area with dense vegetation and moisture. Contrary to popular belief, leeches did not fall from trees on their victims. Instead, they waited in the undergrowth, detecting vibrations and body heat, and then moved surprisingly fast toward the potential host. What made the leeches particularly disturbing was their ability to penetrate through clothing, finding their way through seams and openings, and the fact that their saliva contained a natural anesthetic that made their bite painless. Soldiers often did not realize they were being attacked until they stopped to rest and noticed bloodstains spreading through their uniforms. Removing leeches had to be done carefully, as pulling them sharply could leave their jaws buried in the skin, leading to infections. The preferred method was to apply salt, heat from a lit cigarette, or insect repellent, causing the leech to loosen its grip and fall. The giant centipedes of Vietnam, some reaching lengths of more than 30 centimeters, were aggressive nocturnal predators equipped with poisonous forks. These armored creatures moved with alarming speed and did not hesitate to attack if disturbed. Their stings were extraordinarily painful, injecting venom that caused severe throbbing pain, massive swelling, and, in sensitive individuals, potentially severe allergic reactions. Soldiers described the pain of a centipede's sting as intense and prolonged, radiating from the site of the bite and can last for days. Centipedes had a disturbing habit of seeking shelter in boots, backpacks, and sleeping bags, leading to terrifying encounters when half-asleep soldiers reached for their gear in the morning. Scorpions, although generally smaller and less aggressive than centipedes, still posed a significant threat. Vietnam is home to several species, some with potent neurotoxic poisons. The pain of a scorpion bite varied depending on the species, but it was usually described as an electric burning sensation that spread rapidly from the injection point. Symptoms could include profuse sweating, excessive salivation, difficulty breathing, and in severe cases, seizures. Individuals with certain health conditions were particularly vulnerable, but even young, healthy soldiers could have severe reactions. Spiders from Vietnam, including several species of tarantulas, crab-eaters, and weaver spiders, varied enormously in size and toxicity. Some of the largest tarantulas had leg wingspans exceeding 20 centimeters. Nocturnal creatures that hunted insects, small lizards, and even rodents. Although most of these giant spiders had relatively weak venoms for humans, their bites were still extremely painful due to the sheer size of their prey. Additionally, many tarantulas had stinging hairs on their abdomens that could be shed when threatened, creating a cloud of tiny barbed hairs that caused severe irritation to the skin, eyes, and airways. Soldiers who accidentally disturbed these spiders often experienced hours of unbearable itching, and, if hairs got into the eyes, painful conjunctivitis could last for days. But perhaps no creature would inspire as much fear as ants. The Vietnamese jungle housed hundreds of species of ants, many of them equipped with powerful jaws and poisonous stingers. Red weaver ants, who built elaborate nests by joining leaves with silk produced by their larvae, were aggressive defenders of their territories. When a nest was disturbed, either intentionally or by accident, thousands of worker ants poured out instantly, attacking en masse. Their bites were surprisingly painful for such small creatures, and they had a habit of biting and holding while simultaneously spraying formic acid on the wounds, intensifying the pain. A soldier who inadvertently touched or knocked over a nest of weaver ants could find himself covered by hundreds of these creatures within seconds, experiencing thousands of simultaneous bites that created an intense burning sensation throughout his body. Fire ants, smaller but no less problematic, built their nests in the ground and responded violently to any disturbance. Soldiers who stepped on heaps of fire ants quickly learned to recognize the specific sensation of hundreds of tiny jaws sticking themselves through their socks and boots. Fire ant bites created characteristic white pustules that persisted for days and itched intensely, and allergic individuals could develop severe reactions that required immediate medical attention. But there were bigger threats lurking in the jungle, predators that occupied the top of the food chain and saw humans not as threats to be feared, but as invaders in their territory. Indochina tigers, a subspecies of the endangered tiger even at that time, still roamed the remote forests in reasonable numbers during the 60s. These were apex predators, weighing up to 200 pounds of muscle and equipped with impressive strength and agility. The war, with its chaos, created conditions that occasionally led to encounters between soldiers and tigers. Individual tigers who had lost their natural prey due to intense bombardment and chemical defoliation, or who were too old or injured to hunt their usual prey, sometimes became bolder. Stories circulated among the tiger troops who followed patrols through the jungle. A tiger attacking from the ambush was virtually invisible until the last second, its striped coat providing perfect camouflage in the stained light of the forest. The attack itself was devastatingly fast and efficient, posing extreme danger to anyone in isolation. Leopards, although smaller than tigers, were possibly more dangerous in some ways. More adaptable and more comfortable near human settlements, leopards occasionally roamed the perimeters of military camps at night, attracted by the smell of food or simply exploring their territory. Leopards who became too bold were particularly problematic because they often returned to the same locations, making specific areas dangerous for prolonged periods. His ability to climb trees meant that even soldiers who thought they were safe in high positions were not completely protected. Asian black bears, also known as moon bears due to the characteristic crescent-shaped white mark on their chests, were another significant danger. These bears, which could weigh more than 150 kilograms, were opportunistic omnivores with notoriously unpredictable temperaments. During the fruit season, bears often fed near villages and camps, and encounters with humans were not uncommon. A surprised bear could attack with surprising ferocity. Equipped with long, curved claws and powerful jaws, Asian black bears were able to inflict serious injury. The sheer strength of an adult bear meant that it could easily take down and overpower even the strongest soldiers, making any encounter potentially dangerous. Saltwater crocodiles, the largest living reptiles in the world, inhabited the estuaries, rivers, and coastal mangroves of Vietnam. These ancient predators, virtually unchanged from the age of dinosaurs, could grow up to 7 meters long and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Saltwater crocodiles are known to be the most aggressive and territorial crocodilians, and they occasionally posed a danger to humans. For soldiers who needed to cross rivers or move through mangrove areas, the threat of crocodiles was a constant concern. These predators are masters of ambush, able to remain completely submerged with only their eyes and nostrils above water, virtually invisible until the moment of attack. When a saltwater crocodile attacks, it does so with explosive speed, launching out of the water with impressive force. Once a crocodile manages to grab, the situation becomes extremely dangerous, and the results were rarely favorable without immediate intervention. The reticulated pythons, though not poisonous, posed another formidable threat. These are the longest snakes in the world, occasionally exceeding 7 meters in length. Pythons are constrictors, using their muscular strength to subdue prey. Although python attacks on adult humans are rare, they are not unknown, especially when the snake is hungry or feels threatened. There are verified reports of soldiers finding giant pythons in the jungle, and at least a few suspected instances of disappearances. The strength of a large python is difficult to comprehend until it is witnessed in person, and escaping from one without help is extremely difficult. Wild boars, while they may seem less intimidating than large predators, were surprisingly dangerous when cornered or protecting young. Adult males could weigh more than 100 pounds and were equipped with sharp fangs capable of causing serious injury. Boars carried when threatened, using their low heads and considerable force. The injuries resulting from boar attacks were often severe and required urgent medical attention. In addition to the dangers posed by predators and poisonous creatures, there was the constant threat of animal-borne diseases beyond those carried by mosquitoes. Leptospirosis, a bacterial infection transmitted through rodent urine, was common in areas where troops had to wade through stagnant water or work in flooded rice fields. The bacteria entered the body through cuts, abrasions, or mucous membranes, causing an illness that began with flu-like symptoms but could progress quickly to serious complications if left untreated. Rabies was another constant danger, carried not only by wild dogs but also by bats, monkeys, and other mammals. A bite from a rabid animal required immediate treatment with the vaccine series, and in the jungle, far from medical facilities, he said such treatment was often impossible to obtain quickly. Rabies has one of the highest mortality rates of any infectious disease once neurological symptoms develop, making early prevention and treatment absolutely essential. Schistosomiasis, caused by trematode parasites whose larvae penetrated through the skin when soldiers came into contact with contaminated water, was another common scourge. These microscopic parasites made their homes in the blood vessels, where they lived for years if left untreated, causing progressive damage to internal organs, particularly the liver and bladder. Initial symptoms were often mild, but over time, schistosomiasis could lead to serious complications, including portal hypertension, liver failure, and bladder cancer. Fungi and mold were ubiquitous in the humid, warm environment of the Vietnamese jungle and created their own set of medical problems. Athlete's foot had crural and other fungal infections were virtually universal among troops, caused by the constant moisture inside boots and uniforms. Severe cases resulted in deep cracks in the skin that were painful and prone to secondary infections. Fungal infections of the lungs, although less common, were possible when spores were inhaled, potentially leading to debilitating chronic conditions. The psychological impact of living under constant threat not only from human enemies but also from a hostile and often invisible nature cannot be underestimated. Soldiers developed constant vigilance, checking every shadow, every movement in the vegetation, every strange sound in the night. The stress of never being truly safe, of knowing what danger could come from literally any direction at any time, took its mental toll. Veterans would later describe how fear of the natural dangers of the jungle sometimes exceeded their fear of the human enemy. At least with combatants there was some predictability, some tactical logic that could be understood. But a snake hidden in the undergrowth or a centipede hidden in a boot did not follow rules of engagement and could not be deterred by superior firepower. The long-term effects of these experiments persisted long after the soldiers returned home. Veterans reported persistent phobias of insects, reptiles, and other animals decades after leaving Vietnam. Nightmares featuring encounters with jungle wildlife were common, sometimes more frequent until dreams of actual combat. Some developed psychosomatic dermatological conditions, feeling phantom sensations of insects crawling on their skin long after returning to temperate climates where such creatures were rare. The post-traumatic stress disorder that afflicted so many Vietnam veterans resulted not only from their combat experiences, but also from prolonged exposure to an environment where lethal threats lurked in every shadow and every step could be the last. The military institutional response to these challenges evolved over the course of the war. Training programs have been expanded to include more comprehensive education on the dangers of wildlife and tropical diseases. First aid kits were updated to include antivenom for the most common snake species, although the limited lifespan and cooling requirements of these serums made their distribution in the field problematic. Combat doctors have received specialized training in recognizing and treating bites, and tropical diseases. Protocols have been established for the rapid evacuation of victims of severe poisoning, with helicopters often diverted from other missions to transport soldiers bitten by snake or suffering from severe allergic reactions to medical facilities where proper treatment was available. Still, despite these efforts, casualties related to wildlife and disease continued throughout the war. Official numbers are difficult to determine precisely because many cases were not adequately documented or were categorized generically as non-combat casualties. Estimates suggest that for every soldier killed in direct action, at least 2 others were evacuated for medical reasons unrelated to combat injuries, and a significant proportion of these evacuations were related to encounters with native fauna and flora or diseases they carried. Vietnamese forces, both north and south, having grown up and lived in that environment, possessed native knowledge that provided some protection. They knew which plants to avoid, recognized the warning sounds of dangerous animals, and had traditional remedies to treat certain bites and stings. Viet Cong guerrillas, in particular, have become incredibly adept at using the jungle as an ally, not only for camouflage and supply routes, but also actively incorporating its dangers into traps and defensive tactics. Traps were often placed in strategic locations, including areas known to harbor venomous snakes or other dangerous creatures, increasing the likelihood that soldiers would encounter multiple hazards simultaneously. There were also reports, though difficult to verify completely, of Viet Cong occasionally using dangerous animals more directly in their defense. Stories circulated of venomous snakes being placed in tunnels where American soldiers could enter, or of wasp or bee nests being strategically disturbed near American positions. How much of these stories were true and how much folklore was born of the stress of combat and the need to explain the unexplainable is impossible to say with certainty, but the possibility itself spoke of how much nature itself had become weaponized in the context of war. The jungle environment also deeply complicated medical logistics. Injuries that could be easily treated in more temperate environments often became critical in the humid heat of Vietnam. Infections were established at an alarming rate. A simple scratch could become a purulent wound in a matter of hours. Sutures dissolved prematurely due to constant moisture and sweat. Antibiotics had to be administered at higher doses and for longer periods than would be typical to combat the particularly resistant strains of bacteria that thrived in that environment. Storage conditions for medical supplies were perpetually problematic, with drugs degrading more quickly into heat and moisture. Medical equipment corrodes and molds. Even simple tasks like maintaining sterile bandages were challenging when everything was perpetually damp and exposed to contamination. The war also had a profound impact on Vietnamese wildlife itself. Massive bombardments, chemical defoliation through extensive use of Agent Orange and other herbicides, and the movement of millions of troops through previously remote habitats disturbed ecosystems that had remained relatively unchanged for centuries. Populations of large mammals have declined dramatically. Species that were once rare have become even rarer. Some, such as the Vietnamese Java rhino, would eventually go extinct in the following decades, their populations never recovering from the impacts of the war. The irony was bitter. The war waged ostensibly on human ideologies and territories left a legacy of ecological devastation that would persist for generations. But not all encounters with wildlife ended tragically. There were also moments of startled wonder, when soldiers witnessed the sheer majesty of wild nature in its full splendor. Spotting a tiger in the wild, even from a safe distance, was an experience that many veterans would remember for the rest of their lives, with a mixture of terror and reverential awe. The sight of a flock of wild elephants moving through the jungle, their evident size and power but tempered by astonishing grace, provided perspective on human insignificance itself in the grand scheme of nature. Tropical birds of impossible colors, their calls echoing through the forest at dawn, offered brief moments of beauty amidst the difficulties. Gibbons singing their complex territorial duets in the treetops created symphonies that temporarily made soldiers forget where they were and why they were there. The scientific community was also interested in the unique challenges presented by the Vietnamese environment. Entomologists, herpetologists, and other specialists were occasionally brought in to study the creatures that caused so much trouble to the troops. New species were discovered, new understandings about poisons and toxins were developed, and medical advances were made in the treatment of exotic poisonings. Some of these advances would eventually benefit civil medicine back in the United States and elsewhere, an unexpected scientific legacy from that historical period. The experiences of soldiers in Vietnam have also contributed to a growing awareness among the American public about the incredible diversity of life on Earth and the importance of conservation. Photographs and accounts of the Vietnamese jungles, while often emphasizing the dangers, also highlighted the richness of tropical biodiversity. This occurred during a period of increasing environmental awareness in the United States, culminating in the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the passage of innovative environmental legislation in the early 70s. The contrast between the pristine savagery of the Vietnamese jungle and the devastation caused by modern warfare has contributed to debates about human responsibility towards the natural world. For the Vietnamese themselves, both North and South, the jungle and its inhabitants had always been an integral part of their culture and identity. Ancient legends told stories of tigers who were spirits of ancestors, of snakes who guarded sacred treasures, of elephants who assisted heroes in their missions. Traditional Vietnamese medicine had long incorporated wild animal products, for good or ill. War, with its industrial scale of destruction, represented a profound break with these traditional relationships with nature. Villages that had existed in relative balance with the surrounding forest for generations were displaced. Traditional hunting routes were cut by free-fire zones. Sacred sites in the forest were bombed until they became craters. Decades after the war ended, veterans gathering for celebrations or group therapy often found themselves exchanging stories not of battles but of their encounters with wildlife. These narratives, passed down from generation to generation, became part of the mythology of war. Grandchildren listened with wide eyes to large snakes like tree trunks, dish-sized spiders, and tigers lurking through the night. For many veterans, talking about these encounters with nature was sometimes easier than talking about combat itself, a way of processing trauma through narratives that were extraordinary but without the complicated moral weight of human-to-human violence. The medical challenges presented by Vietnamese conditions have also led to advances in tropical and emergency medicine that continue to benefit people around the world today. Protocols developed to treat snake bites in the field have informed civilian medical practices. Research on malaria and other tropical diseases has received significant funding due to military needs, accelerating discoveries that might otherwise have taken decades. The development of more effective insect repellents, insecticide-treated fabrics, and improved methods of water purification arose directly from the needs of troops in Vietnam. Looking back now, more than half a century after the end of the war, we can see the Vietnamese experience as a profound lesson in human arrogance and the limits of technological power. The most technologically advanced nation on Earth, with unprecedented firepower and seemingly limitless resources, found that it could not simply subdue an environment that had evolved over millions of years. The jungle, with all its inhabitants, proved to be an adversary that could not be bombarded to submission, could not be negotiated, and did not recognize technological superiority. It was a humbling reminder that, for all our sophistication and power, humans are still just one species among millions, vulnerable to the same natural forces that shaped life on Earth from the beginning. The history of Vietnamese wildlife during the war is also a story of resilience. Despite the massive devastation, many species survived. The forests, though damaged, began to regenerate. In the absence of humans in certain areas designated as demilitarized zones or areas too polluted with unexploded explosives to be inhabited, nature has returned, creating accidental refuges of biodiversity. Today, decades after the end of the war, Vietnam is working to conserve its remaining natural treasures by establishing national parks and reserves that protect critical habitats. It is a testament to the tenacity of life that, even after such devastation, recovery is possible. For the soldiers who fought in those jungles, the memories remain vivid. To this day, the smell of tropical vegetation, the sound of heavy rain on foliage, even the sight of a harmless snake in a zoo can trigger powerful memories of that time and place. These experiences have shaped them in profound ways, teaching lessons about humility, about human insignificance in the face of the forces of nature, and about the incredible adaptability and survival of both humans and the wild ecosystems they have invaded. The Vietnam War narrative we focus on in classrooms and history books is important and should not be forgotten. The political, strategic, and moral lessons of that conflict continue to reverberate through American foreign policy to this day. But there is also value in remembering this other dimension of war, this struggle against an enemy that had no political ideology, carried no flag, and had no interest in human affairs other than surviving in its own habitat. The stories of soldiers confronting tigers and snakes, of men suffering from malaria and poisonings, of entire units being temporarily incapacitated by tropical diseases. These are also part of the historical record and deserve to be told. May we learn from these experiences not only about war and nature, but about our place in the natural world. May we approach future conflicts and interactions with the natural world with greater humility and respect. And may we remember those who served, who fought not only against human enemies but against the elements themselves, and who bear the scars, both visible and invisible, of these experiences to this day. As we reflect on these remarkable stories of courage, suffering, and survival, we are reminded that amidst the chaos created by human hands, there is a natural world that operates according to its own ancient laws, indifferent to our conflicts and ambitions. And perhaps, in the end, this is the most profound lesson of all, that we should walk more lightly on this earth, respecting not only each other, but all the forms of life with which we share this planet, gift of the Lord God, who in his infinite wisdom created a world of incomprehensible diversity and wonder, a world that challenges us, humbles us, and it reminds us of our own mortality and place in the great tapestry of existence.